12 hours. That's how long I was under anesthesia for emergency spinal surgery, fighting for my ability to walk again. 12 hours during which my devoted husband Timothy apparently decided our 20-year marriage was worth exactly $0.93, the balance he left in our joint account after cleaning out everything else. What he didn't know was that my grandmother's $5 million trust fund would hit my personal account the very next morning, and I was awake just enough to hear him on the phone, planning how to get his hands on that too. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Mercy General's recovery ward burn against my barely opened eyelids as consciousness creeps back like a reluctant tide. My spine feels like it's been rebuilt with titanium rods and prayers, which, according to Dr. Morrison's pre-surgery briefing, isn't far from the truth. The herniated discs that had been crushing my spinal cord for months finally gave way, completely during what should have been a routine board meeting. One moment I was presenting quarterly projections for my consulting firm. The next I was on the conference room floor, legs completely numb, paramedics rushing me to emergency surgery. The anesthesia clings to my thoughts like cotton, making everything feel distant and dreamlike. But there's something wrong with this picture. The private room I'd specifically requested and paid extra for echoes with voices that shouldn't be here. Timothy's voice, yes, but also others. Strangers discussing things that make my blood run cold despite the morphine drip. The timing couldn't be more perfect, Timothy says, his tone carrying none of the worried husband act he'd performed for the medical staff. She'll be in recovery for at least a week, maybe 2. Completely dependent on pain medication, probably. Not even coherent half the time. I try to move, to sit up, to speak, but my body betrays me. The combination of anesthesia, pain medication, and genuine spinal trauma has left me in a twilight state, conscious enough to process what I'm hearing, but unable to respond. It's like being buried alive in my own body. Are you certain about the account access? A woman's voice, professional and cold. I don't recognize her, but something about her tone suggests she's done this before. Banks are getting stricter about spousal transfers, especially large amounts. Carrie signed the updated power of attorney forms last month, Timothy replies, and I feel my heart skip despite the medication. Those forms. He'd brought them home on a Wednesday evening, casual as ordering takeout. Just updating our estate planning, honey. The lawyer says married couples should have comprehensive coverage. I'd signed them without reading, trusting my husband of 20 years, focused instead on preparing for my surgery and managing the excruciating pain that had been my constant companion for months. The business accounts too? The woman presses. Every single one. Carrie's been so focused on her back problems, she basically handed me complete financial control. The irony is beautiful. Her own medical emergency gave me the perfect cover, my consulting firm. The business I'd built from nothing over 15 years, growing it from a one-woman operation run from our kitchen table to a multi-million-dollar enterprise with 12 employees and corporate clients across 3 states. The accounts that held not just operating expenses but the accumulated profits from years of 18-hour days and weekend sacrifices. What about the trust fund? A third voice, male, gravelly from what sounds like decades of cigarettes. That could complicate things. Timothy's laugh is low and satisfied. Grandmother Evelyn's final gift, $5 million, released on Carrie's 45th birthday. Tomorrow, as fate would have it. But here's the beautiful part. She's going. To be so grateful when she wakes up to find me managing everything for her. The devoted husband, taking care of all the complicated financial details while she recovers. The pieces click together with horrifying clarity. My birthday. In all the chaos of emergency surgery, I'd completely forgotten. 45 years old tomorrow, and the trust fund my grandmother had established would finally mature. Grandmother. Evelyn, who'd built her fortune in real estate during the post-war boom, who'd always told me money was power, and power was never to be given away lightly. She'd structured the trust specifically to protect it from fortune hunters and fair weather. Husbands, as she'd put it. The money could only be accessed by me, with my signature in person, with proper identification and biometric verification. But Timothy doesn't know about those restrictions. The trust documents are in my personal safe, not the shared filing cabinet. He thinks it's just another account he can access with his newfound power of attorney. "How much did you manage to transfer today?" the woman asks. "Everything liquid. The business accounts, personal savings, the investment portfolios, about 3.2 million total. Left just enough in the joint checking to avoid automatic overdraft. Alerts. She won't notice for days, maybe weeks. $3.2 million. 20 years of my life's work. Vanished while I was unconscious on an operating table. The betrayal cuts deeper than any scalpel ever could." "What's the timeline for the rest?" the gravelly voice asks. "The trust fund hits her account at midnight. Tonight. By tomorrow afternoon, it'll all be transferred to the offshore accounts Dennis set up. By the time she's alert enough to understand what happened, we'll be long gone." Dennis. I file the name away, my mind sharpening despite the pharmaceutical. Fog. Another conspirator. Another thread in whatever web they've woven around my unconscious form. And if she wakes up sooner than expected? The woman's voice carries an edge of concern. "She won't," Timothy says with complete confidence. "I spoke with Dr. Morrison this morning. The surgery was more complicated than expected. Carrie will be on high-dose pain medication for at least 10 days, probably confused and disoriented when she is awake. Even if she does start asking questions, who's going to believe a woman high on morphine claiming her husband stole millions? The casual way he discusses my condition, my vulnerability, makes my stomach churn. This man has seen me at my weakest, held my hand through months of agony, promised to love me in sickness and in health. Now he's treating my medical crisis like a business opportunity. The beauty of it," Timothy continues, "is that everyone will see exactly what they expect to see. The devoted husband, managing his wife's affairs while she recovers from major surgery. The medical staff already thinks I'm wonderful, bringing flowers, asking detailed questions about her care, staying late into the evening. Footsteps approach, my bed, and I force myself to remain perfectly still. Timothy's hand brushes my forehead, the same gentle touch that once comforted me through countless sleepless nights of pain. "Sleep well, darling," he whispers, his voice a perfect imitation of loving concern. "Don't worry about a thing. I'm taking care of everything." As their footsteps fade and the door closes with a soft click, I lie in the darkness of my recovery room, processing the magnitude of what I've discovered. 20 years of marriage, reduced to a criminal conspiracy. My life's work, stolen while I was fighting to walk again. My husband, transformed into a stranger who's planned my financial destruction with the same attention to detail he once brought to our anniversary dinners. But Timothy has made one crucial mistake. In his careful planning, his perfect timing, his thorough preparation, he's assumed I would remain unconscious, helpless, dependent. He's counted on my vulnerability, my trust, my medicated confusion. He doesn't realize that some kinds of pain cut through every drug, that betrayal has a way of sharpening focus even through the thickest pharmaceutical haze. And he certainly doesn't know that his perfect victim has just become his most dangerous opponent. The morphine drip continues its steady rhythm, but my mind is clear now, burning with a clarity that cuts through every chemical fog. Tomorrow, $5 million will arrive in my account, and Timothy is about to learn that stealing from someone while they're down isn't just cruel. It's strategically stupid. The recovery room is quiet now, but the real surgery, the kind that cuts out cancer instead of repairing spines, is just beginning. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The night shift brings different sounds. Softer footsteps, quieter conversations, the distant hum of machines keeping other patients stable. I've learned to time my breathing with the monitors, to control my heart rate despite the rage building in my chest. 20 years in business consulting has taught me patience, how to read situations before acting, but nothing has prepared me for this level of betrayal. My phone buzzes on the bedside table, a sound that nearly makes me flinch before I catch myself. Through my barely opened eyes, I watch Timothy reach for it, his face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. "It's done," he says quietly into the device. Every accessible account has been cleared. The final transfers went through an hour ago. A pause as he listens to whoever's on the other end. No, she hasn't stirred. The anesthesiologist said she'd be out until at least morning, maybe longer given the complications during surgery. His voice carries that same caring tone he'd used with the nurses. But now I hear the performance in it. Yes, I'm staying the night. The devoted husband keeping vigil. Another pause, longer this time. The trust fund should hit at midnight, about 4 hours from now. Dennis confirmed the offshore accounts are ready to receive the transfers. We'll have a 12-hour window before the banks open on the East Coast. More than enough time. My business phone. He's using my business phone, the one connected to all my banking alerts, my corporate accounts. The irony would be amusing if it weren't so devastating. I'd added him to the authorized user list 2 years ago when I started having back problems, thinking it would help him handle emergencies if I was ever incapacitated. Classic Timothy, always thinking 3 moves ahead, even in his affection. The beauty is in the timing, he continues, settling back into the uncomfortable hospital chair. Nobody questions financial moves during a medical crisis. Emergency. Transfers? Rapid liquidation to pay for unexpected procedures, it all looks perfectly legitimate. By the time anyone thinks to ask questions, we'll be beyond their reach. The door opens with a soft whoosh, and I recognize the footsteps of Annie, my night nurse. She'd introduced herself earlier, during one of my brief moments of apparent consciousness. Young, earnest, the kind of person who went into nursing because she genuinely wanted to help people. "How is she doing, Mr. Henderson?" Annie asks, her voice professionally quiet. "Stable," Timothy replies, and I can hear him sliding my phone back onto the nightstand. "She's been sleeping peacefully for the past few hours. The pain medication seems to be helping." "That's good. Dr. Morrison mentioned the surgery was more complex than originally planned. Sometimes the body needs extra time to process that kind of trauma." "Of course. Whatever she needs. Money is no object. I want the best care possible for my wife." The sincerity in his voice is perfect. If I didn't know what I know, I'd be touched by his devotion. Annie certainly seems to be. She's lucky to have such a caring husband. Not everyone has that kind of support during recovery. "We've been together for 20 years, Timothy says, and I can picture his modest smile. "She'd do the same for me, would I?" The question hits harder than expected. 3 hours ago, absolutely. Now, lying here listening to him orchestrate my financial destruction, I realize I never really knew him at all. Annie checks my vitals, her touch gentle and professional. Her blood pressure is slightly elevated, but that's normal after major surgery. I'll note it in her chart. My blood pressure is elevated because I'm fighting every instinct to sit up and scream at my husband. But I force myself to remain still, to breathe evenly, to give no sign that I'm processing every word. "When do you expect her to be more alert?" Timothy asks, and there's something in his tone that makes Annie pause. It varies by patient. Some people bounce back quickly from anesthesia. Others take longer. With the pain medication she's on, I'd expect her to drift in and out for the next day or two. Why? Are you concerned about something specific? Not concerned exactly, just she handles all our financial affairs and there are some time-sensitive business matters that might need attention. Nothing that can't wait, of course, but I want to be prepared. Smooth. So very smooth. He's already laying the groundwork for tomorrow's story. The loving husband, forced to make difficult financial decisions because his wife is too medicated to think clearly. I understand, Annie says. But honestly, Mr. Henderson, even when she is more awake, she's going to be on heavy pain medication for at least a week. Her judgment might be impaired. Her memory spotty. It's probably better if you handle whatever needs handling. That's what I was thinking. I have power of attorney, so I can manage anything urgent. I just want to make sure I'm not overstepping. You're being very thoughtful. Most spouses in your situation would have already taken care of business matters without asking. After Annie leaves, Timothy makes another call. She won't be competent to make financial decisions for days, maybe weeks, he reports. The nurse just confirmed it. Even when she's awake, she'll be too drugged to think clearly. I catalog every word, every detail. My mind, despite the medication, feels laser-focused now. Years of analyzing complex business situations have taught me to compartmentalize, to separate emotion from strategy. The betrayal hurts. God, it hurts. But the rage is crystallizing into something more useful: determination. Tomorrow morning, as soon as the trust fund appears in her account, we execute the final phase. Timothy continues. I'll be the concerned husband, making necessary financial moves to ensure her medical care is covered. No one will question it. He's right, of course. Who would question a husband managing his wife's affairs during a medical emergency? The optics are perfect, too perfect to be accidental. This level of planning suggests he's been thinking about this for months, maybe years. Dennis has the documentation ready? Good. The beauty of spousal financial management is that it's completely legal until someone proves otherwise. By the time anyone realizes what happened, the money will be untraceable. Dennis again. A name with no face, but clearly someone with experience in financial manipulation. I file it away with everything else, building a mental dossier of the conspiracy unfolding around my hospital bed. As Timothy ends his call and settles back into the chair, I hear him sigh. A sound of satisfaction rather than exhaustion. He thinks he's won. He thinks I'm the same trusting wife who signed power of attorney papers without reading them, who let him handle increasing amounts of our financial planning as my back problems worsened. But lying here, forced into stillness, I'm remembering things I'd forgotten in the haze of chronic pain and surgical preparation. Small inconsistencies in our accounts. Questions about my business earnings that seemed caring, but now feel calculating. His enthusiasm for updating our estate planning. His insistence on streamlining our financial structure. The signs were there. I was just too trusting, too focused on my physical pain to see the bigger picture. Timothy's breathing evens out as he dozes in the chair. But my mind is racing. In 6 hours, $5 million will appear in my account. He's counting on having 12 hours to steal it before anyone notices, but he's made one crucial miscalculation. He's assumed I'll remain unconscious, helpless, dependent on his version of events. He's planned for every contingency except the one now unfolding. His victim is awake, aware, and already 3 steps ahead of his timeline. The morphine drip continues. It's steady rhythm, but I'm learning to think through it, to use the appearance of sedation as camouflage. Tomorrow, Timothy expects to wake up rich and free. Instead, he's about to discover that his perfect crime has one fatal flaw. The victim he's trying to destroy is also the opponent he's least equipped to handle. The clock on the wall reads 11:47 p.m. when I realize the full scope of my advantages. Timothy thinks he's married to a vulnerable woman dependent on his care, but he's forgotten exactly who he's trying to deceive. 20 years building a business consulting firm doesn't just teach you about profit margins and strategic planning. It teaches you about people, patterns, and most importantly, how to spot deception from a mile away. My spine may be held together with titanium, but my mind is processing information with the same analytical precision that built Henderson. consulting from a kitchen table startup into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. Every conversation I've overheard, every detail they've let slip, is being cataloged and cross-referenced against 20 years of marriage, 15 years of business operations, and a lifetime of reading people's intentions. The irony is almost beautiful. Timothy chose this moment because he thought my medical crisis made me helpless. Instead, it's given me the perfect cover to observe, analyze, and plan, without any of them suspecting I'm capable of strategic thinking. Through my closed eyelids, I watch Timothy check his watch obsessively. 13 minutes until the trust fund transfers. He's pulled out a laptop, my laptop, I realize with another spike of anger, and is typing quietly, probably preparing the transfer documentation. The blue glow illuminates his face, and I see something I've never noticed before: the calculating expression he wears when he thinks no one is watching. How long has he been planning this? The question gnaws at me as I inventory the clues I missed. The power of attorney forms weren't spur of the moment. They were comprehensive, professionally prepared, designed specifically to give him access to accounts I thought were protected. That level of legal documentation takes weeks to prepare properly. My business training kicks in, analyzing the situation like a hostile takeover attempt. Timothy has clearly done his research, identified vulnerabilities, prepared contingencies. But he's made the classic mistake that brings down most corporate schemes. He's underestimated his primary target. As a consultant, I've spent 2 decades helping companies protect themselves from exactly this kind of internal threat. I've analyzed embezzlement schemes, identified fraudulent partnerships, and restructured organizations to prevent insider theft. The patterns are always the same. The perpetrator assumes their victim won't fight back effectively because they've been deceived about the victim's true capabilities. Timothy knows I'm successful, but he's never truly understood how I became successful. He sees the financial results, but not the tactical thinking, the strategic planning, the ability to stay 3 moves ahead of competitors and hostile actors. He's about to discover that the same skills that built my business make me uniquely equipped to dismantle his conspiracy. The laptop screen flickers as he navigates what looks like banking interfaces. I can see reflected numbers, transfer amounts being calculated. My grandmother's trust fund management company used Provident Financial Services. I remember the logo from the trust documents locked in my personal safe. What Timothy doesn't know is that Provident specializes in high net worth protection. They don't just hand over $5 million based on power of attorney alone, especially not for electronic transfers to offshore accounts. Grandmother Evelyn was paranoid about fortune hunters, but she was also brilliant about financial security. The trust requires biometric verification, fingerprint and retinal scan, along with in-person signature verification for any transfer over $50,000. Timothy is about to discover that his research was incomplete. But I can't count on banking security alone. I need to be proactive, strategic, comprehensive in my response. 20 years of business has taught me that defense isn't enough. You need offense to truly win. My mind shifts into the same mode I use for complex business analysis, breaking down the conspiracy into component parts. Timothy, primary actor, has legal power of attorney, access to most accounts, but overconfident and underinformed about trust fund security. Dennis, financial specialist, probably experienced in offshore transfers, handles the technical aspects. Unknown woman. Professional tone suggests legal or financial background. Possibly. The local coordinator timeline. Trust fund transfers at midnight. They expect 12-hour window for final theft. Their advantages: legal documentation, my apparent incapacitation, perfect cover story. My advantages: they don't know I'm conscious. I understand their full plan. I have professional expertise in exactly this type of fraud prevention, critical vulnerabilities in their plan: overconfidence, Incomplete research on trust fund security. Assumption that I'll remain helpless. The laptop screen shows 11:54 p.m. Timothy's fingers are poised over the keyboard, waiting for the precise moment when the trust fund becomes available. His breathing is slightly elevated. Even master manipulators feel nervous during the execution phase. At exactly midnight, I watch his fingers fly across the keyboard. He's entering transfer commands, probably trying to move the money the moment it appears. After 30 seconds, he frowns. After a minute, he starts typing more aggressively. After 2 minutes, he's clearly frustrated. "What do you mean, additional verification required?" he mutters to himself, reading something on the screen. Perfect. Grandmother Evelyn's paranoia is paying dividends even from beyond the grave. Timothy is discovering that stealing $5 million isn't as simple as having power of attorney. He reaches for his phone, clearly preparing to call Dennis or the mysterious woman. But then he pauses, glancing at me with sudden uncertainty. For the first time tonight, I see doubt in his expression. Not doubt about the plan, but doubt about something he's seeing in my vital signs. My heart rate has remained steady despite everything I've learned, but controlling your cardiovascular response to betrayal while maintaining the appearance of unconsciousness is exhausting. Some micro-expression, some tiny change in my breathing pattern, has caught his attention. Timothy stands up slowly, approaching my bed with the careful steps of someone suddenly unsure of their situation. He leans over me, studying my face with new intensity. "Carrie?" he whispers, his voice carrying none of the fake concern from earlier. This is genuine uncertainty. "Can you hear me?" I force myself to remain completely still, to breathe with the steady rhythm of someone deep in medication-induced sleep. But my mind is racing. If he suspects I'm conscious, everything changes. The 12-hour timeline collapses, the careful planning becomes useless, and this becomes a much more dangerous game. "She's been under heavy sedation," he says to himself, but there's no conviction in his voice. The anesthesia alone should keep her out for hours. He stands there for what feels like an eternity, watching me breathe, looking for any sign that I'm aware of what's happening. I've never been more grateful for 20 years of high-stakes business meetings, where controlling your facial expressions and body language can make the difference between success and failure. Finally, he steps back, but I can feel his continued suspicion. The dynamic has shifted. He's no longer operating with complete confidence, which makes him more dangerous, but also more likely to make mistakes. Timothy returns to the laptop, but his movements are different now, more cautious, more paranoid. He's second-guessing himself, which is exactly what I need. Uncertain criminals make errors, and errors create opportunities. My advantage isn't just that I'm conscious while appearing unconscious. It's that I'm a professional strategist who's spent decades analyzing exactly these kinds of schemes, while he's an amateur who's gotten lucky so far through my trust and his timing. But luck runs out, especially when you're up against someone who's made a career of staying 2 steps ahead of people trying to take what doesn't belong to them. The real game is just beginning, and Timothy has no idea he's playing against a professional. The digital clock's red numbers blur slightly as I focus on controlling my breathing pattern, but my mind has never been clearer. 12:23 a.m. Timothy has been fighting with the laptop for 23 minutes, his frustration mounting with each failed transfer attempt. The trust fund security measures are working exactly as Grandmother Evelyn designed them, but I can't rely on banking protocols alone. I need to turn this medical crisis into my greatest strategic advantage. My years building Henderson Consulting taught me that the best defense is often an aggressive offense, but in this case, I'm playing a different game entirely. I'm not just trying to protect my assets. I'm gathering intelligence for a counterattack that Timothy will never see coming. Through barely parted eyelids, I watch him pull out his phone with shaking hands. The composed manipulator from earlier has been replaced by someone encountering his first major obstacle. In business, this is when people make their worst mistakes. When the plan hits unexpected resistance and panic starts to override careful thinking. "We have a problem," he whispers into the phone, glancing nervously at me. "The trust fund won't transfer. It's asking for biometric verification and in-person signature confirmation." A pause as he listens to whoever's on the other end. "What do you mean, didn't you research this? You told me power of attorney would cover everything." His voice is rising, and he catches himself, forcing it back to a whisper. "Well, what are our options now?" This is perfect. Not only is their plan falling apart, but they're revealing backup strategies, alternative approaches, and most importantly, the extent of their desperation. Every word is intelligence I can use against them. Physical coercion? Are you insane? Timothy's face has gone pale. That wasn't part of the deal. I signed up for financial manipulation, not. He trails off, but the implication hangs in the air like poison. My blood runs cold despite the warm hospital room. They're talking about forcing me to authorize the transfers personally, which means they're considering actions that go far beyond theft. But this revelation also gives me crucial information. Timothy isn't prepared for violence, which means he's not the leader of this conspiracy. Someone else is making the hard decisions. "Fine," he says after another long pause. "But if we're changing the plan, I want guarantees. This was supposed to be clean, untraceable. Now you're talking about direct confrontation with a woman who built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. Carrie isn't some helpless victim. She's sharp, she's connected, and if she gets suspicious? If I get suspicious. The irony would be laughable if the situation weren't so dangerous. I'm not suspicious. I'm certain. And I'm not helpless. I'm strategically positioned with perfect intelligence on their entire operation. Tomorrow morning, then, Timothy continues. But I want Dennis here as backup, and I want the exit strategy ready to execute immediately after we get the transfers. This is becoming too complicated, too risky. He ends the call and sits staring at the laptop screen, running his hands through his hair. For the first time tonight, I see genuine fear in his expression. Good. Scared criminals make mistakes, and mistakes create opportunities. But I need more than opportunities. I need a comprehensive strategy that turns this entire situation to my advantage. My mind shifts into the same mode I use for hostile takeover defense, analyzing not just how to prevent the immediate threat, but how to completely dismantle the attacking organization. The morphine drip continues its steady rhythm, but I've learned to use the medication strategically. The appearance of sedation gives me perfect cover for observation and planning, while the actual drugs help me maintain the physical stillness necessary to keep up the deception. It's like being a spy in my own body, conscious and calculating while appearing completely vulnerable. Timothy's laptop shows multiple browser windows open, banking interfaces, offshore account portals, what looks like travel booking sites. He's not just planning to steal my money, he's planning to disappear entirely. The scope of the betrayal keeps expanding, but so does the evidence I'm gathering against him. A soft knock at the door makes Timothy jump. Annie enters for her routine check, and I watch him quickly close the laptop and arrange himself in the devoted husband pose. "How is she doing?" Annie asks, approaching my bed with professional concern. "Restless," Timothy replies, and there's truth in his voice now. Her breathing seemed irregular a few minutes ago, and I thought I saw her eyes flutter. Annie checks my monitors, her touch gentle as she adjusts the leads. Her vitals are actually very stable. Sometimes family members see movement that isn't there. It's completely normal when you're worried. "Maybe you're right," Timothy says, but I can hear the doubt in his voice. It's just 20 years of marriage, you know. I feel like I'd sense if she was aware. If only he knew how aware I am. Not just of his conspiracy, but of every micro-expression, every nervous gesture, every tell that reveals his growing panic. He's operating under enormous stress now, which makes him both more dangerous and more likely to expose himself. The surgery was extensive, Annie explains, making notes on my chart. Her body is focusing all its energy on healing. The pain medication alone would keep most people unconscious for hours. How much longer do you think before she starts waking up properly? Hard to say. Dr. Morrison will evaluate her tomorrow morning, but I'd expect her to be groggy and disoriented for at least another day or two. After Annie leaves, Timothy immediately reopens the laptop and makes another call. The nurse thinks she'll be out until tomorrow night at the earliest, he reports. But I'm telling you, something felt different. Her breathing, her color. I don't think she's as unconscious as we assumed. The voice on the other end is loud enough that I catch fragments. Paranoid. Stick to the plan. Morning confrontation. Fine, Timothy says. But if this goes wrong, if she's more alert than we think, we need to be prepared for her to fight back. Carrie's not just smart, she's ruthless when cornered. I've seen her destroy business competitors who underestimated her. Now that's interesting. Even while betraying me, Timothy understands exactly who he's up against. The question is whether his partners are equally well-informed, or if they're underestimating the woman they're trying to rob. Yes, I know she's physically weak right now, Timothy continues. But her mind is her weapon. Even drugged, even in pain, she processes information faster than most people think when they're healthy. He's right, of course. My physical condition is genuinely compromised. The surgery was major, the recovery will be extensive, and the pain medication does affect my reflexes and coordination. But my analytical abilities, my strategic thinking, my capacity for complex planning, those are not only intact, they're operating at peak efficiency because of the stakes involved. Tomorrow at 8 a.m., Timothy confirms. Dennis brings the portable biometric scanner. We wake her up gently, explain that we need to handle some urgent financial matters due to her medical situation, and get her to authorize the transfers before she's alert enough to ask difficult questions. A portable biometric scanner. Professional equipment, which means this conspiracy has significant resources and technical capabilities. But it also means they're planning to commit their crimes right here in the hospital, surrounded by witnesses, security cameras, and medical staff. Their desperation is forcing them into increasingly risky territory. The call ends, and Timothy slumps back in his chair, exhaustion finally showing in his posture. He thinks he's managed the crisis, adapted to the obstacles, maintained control of the situation. He has no idea that every adaptation he's made has given me more intelligence, more evidence, and more strategic advantages. Tomorrow morning, he expects to wake up a woman barely conscious from surgery and manipulate her into authorizing her own financial destruction. Instead, he's going to discover that his perfect victim spent the entire night wide awake, fully informed, and strategically prepared for everything he's planning to do. The morphine drip continues its rhythm, but my mind is racing through contingencies, backup plans, and offensive strategies. Timothy adapted to the trust fund security measures, but he's about to learn that the real security system protecting my assets isn't banking protocols, it's me. Dawn creeps through the hospital window like an unwelcome witness as I piece together the full magnitude of what Timothy has orchestrated. It's not just theft, it's the systematic dismantling of everything I've built over 2 decades. Through the steady rhythm of machines and Timothy's restless movements, I'm beginning to understand that this conspiracy reaches far deeper than a desperate husband and his offshore accounts. At 6:30 a.m., Timothy makes what he thinks is a quiet phone call, but 20 years of marriage have taught me to recognize every nuance of his voice, even at a whisper. She's still unconscious, but I'm telling you, something feels off, he says, pacing near the window. Her breathing patterns keep changing, and twice I could have sworn I saw her eyes tracking movement. The response must be dismissive because Timothy's voice sharpens with frustration. Don't tell me I'm being paranoid. I know my wife. Carrie's always been aware. Even when she's sleeping, she processes sounds, conversations. It's like she never completely turns off. He's more perceptive than I gave him credit for. I've always been a light sleeper, someone who wakes at unusual sounds, who maintains a level of environmental awareness even during rest. It's a trait that served me well in business. The ability to sense undercurrents, to pick up on details others miss. Now it's become my survival skill. Yes, I understand the timeline, Timothy continues. Dennis will be here at 8 with the equipment, but what if she's more alert than we think? What if she's been listening? A chill runs through me that has nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. If Timothy is starting to suspect the truth, if he's questioning whether I've been conscious during their planning sessions, then everything I've learned could become irrelevant. Worse, it could become dangerous. The original plan was clean, he says, his voice taking on an edge. I've rarely heard in 20 years of marriage. Financial manipulation during a medical crisis. That's sophisticated, defensible. But now you're talking about direct confrontation, forcing her to cooperate while she's recovering from major surgery. That's not just theft, that's... He pauses, and I can almost hear him wrestling with the implications. That's kidnapping, extortion, federal crimes. The scope of their desperation is becoming clear. They're not just willing to steal from me. They're prepared to use my medical vulnerability as leverage for far more serious crimes. The woman on the phone, whoever she is, seems to be pushing for escalation while Timothy is beginning to grasp the legal magnitude of what they're planning. I know what she's worth, Timothy snaps, his whisper becoming more intense. But Carrie didn't build a multi-million-dollar business by being naive or easy to manipulate. Even medicated, even in pain, she's going to ask questions. And if she suspects what they've already taken, the phrase hits me like a physical blow. It's not just the $3.2 million from yesterday. There's more. How much more? How long has this been going on? Timothy ends the call and immediately dials another number. Dennis, it's me. We need to talk about the expanded timeline. A pause. Because I think we've been operating under false assumptions about Carrie's condition. Dennis. Finally, I'm going to learn more about the mysterious financial specialist who's been facilitating this conspiracy. Through Timothy's side of the conversation, a disturbing picture emerges. The business accounts, yes, but what about the subsidiary transfers? The ones you assured me wouldn't show up on her primary statements? Timothy's voice carries a note of panic. Because if she's been more aware than we thought, if she's been processing information, subsidiary transfers. My mind races through the implications. Henderson Consulting has several subsidiary accounts, project-specific funding, client escrow accounts, employee benefits management. If they've been systematically draining those as well, the theft could be far larger than the $3.2 million Timothy mentioned last night. How much total? Timothy asks, and the silence that follows is ominous. Jesus Christ, Dennis. $6.8 million. You didn't think to mention that the numbers were that high? $6.8 million? Nearly $7 million? Stolen while I was dealing with chronic pain, focused on surgery preparation, trusting my husband to help manage our increasingly complex financial situation. The betrayal is so comprehensive, so systematic, that I have to fight to keep my breathing steady. And the shell companies? The ones registered in my name without my knowledge? Timothy's voice is rising again, and he catches himself, glancing nervously at my bed. How is that even legal? It's not legal. What they're describing is identity fraud, business fraud, and financial crimes on a scale that would trigger federal investigation. My name on shell companies I never authorized, my signature forged on documents I never saw. This isn't just a husband stealing from his wife. This is organized financial crime using my medical crisis as cover. The Delaware registrations were supposed to be temporary, Timothy continues. Clean up vehicles for moving the funds offshore. Now you're telling me they've been active for months? Conducting business in Carrie's name? Delaware shell companies conducting business in my name. The implications make my head spin despite the morphine. They've not just stolen my existing assets, they've been using my identity and business reputation to generate additional funds, probably through fraudulent contracts or loans. The legal liability alone could destroy me even if I recover every stolen dollar. What kind of contracts? Timothy's voice has gone deadly quiet. Government contracts? Dennis, are you telling me you've had shell companies registered in my wife's name bidding on federal projects? Federal fraud. Government contract fraud. The charges they're potentially facing, that I could be implicated in, are career-ending, life-destroying felonies. Even as the victim, proving my innocence could take years and cost everything I have left. I don't care what the profit margins were, Timothy hisses. Do you understand what you've done? If federal investigators start looking into this, if they discover the scope of what we've been doing. A new voice enters the room, not through the phone, but through the door. A woman, speaking quietly to someone in the hallway. Room 314. Yes, Mr. Henderson is expecting us. Timothy ends his call abruptly and moves toward the door. Through my barely open eyes, I see him checking his appearance in the mirror, smoothing his hair, arranging his expression into the concerned husband mask. Anya, he says, his voice instantly transformed back to the caring spouse performance. Thank you for coming so early, Anya. Finally, a name for the mysterious woman who's been coordinating this conspiracy. As she enters my field of vision, I'm surprised by what I see. Professional, but not threatening, mid-40s, carrying a briefcase and wearing the kind of conservative business attire that suggests legal or financial services. How is she this morning? Anya asks, approaching my bed with what appears to be genuine concern. Stable, but I'm worried, Timothy replies. There have been moments where I thought she might be more aware than the doctors expected. The timing is unfortunate, Anya says, and there's something in her tone that suggests she's not just talking about my medical condition. The federal audit notifications came through this morning. 3 of the shell companies are flagged for review. Federal audit. The words hang in the air like a death sentence. If federal investigators are already looking into the shell companies, registered in my name, then this conspiracy is about to implode regardless of whether they succeed in stealing the trust fund. How long do we have? Timothy asks. Weeks, maybe days. Once they start connecting the dots between the shell companies and the offshore transfers, they'll trace everything back to the original accounts, including hers. They're going to frame me. The realization hits with crystal clarity. If federal investigators discover the shell companies registered in my name, if they find evidence of the fraudulent contracts Dennis has been running, they'll assume I'm the mastermind. My medical crisis, my apparent incapacitation, could be seen as an elaborate cover story for financial crimes I never committed. Then we move fast, Timothy says. The trust fund, the remaining accounts, everything liquidated and transferred within the next 6 hours. That's not possible with the security protocols, Anya replies. But there is another option. The way she says it makes my blood run cold. We wake her up, Anya continues, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. We explain that there are urgent financial matters that require her immediate attention. We get her to authorize the transfers before she's alert enough to understand what she's really signing. And if she refuses? If she's more aware than we think and starts asking questions? Anya's pause is telling. Then we remind her that she's already implicated in federal fraud charges. That cooperation is her only chance of avoiding prosecution. They're planning to blackmail me with crimes they committed in my name. The elegant cruelty of it is breathtaking. Steal my money, forge my identity for additional fraud, then threaten me with prosecution for their crimes unless I authorize the theft of my remaining assets. But they've made one crucial miscalculation. They assume I've been unconscious during their planning, that I don't understand the full scope of their conspiracy, that I'll wake up confused and vulnerable to their manipulation. Instead, I've spent the night gathering intelligence on federal crimes, identity fraud, and a conspiracy that reaches far beyond simple theft. When they wake me up in 2 hours, they'll expect to find a confused woman recovering from surgery. They're going to discover they've been planning their crimes in front of the most dangerous possible witness, someone with complete knowledge of their conspiracy and every reason to destroy them. At 7:15 a.m., the door opens again, and this time I hear heavier footsteps accompanied by the soft whir of equipment being wheeled into my room. Through my barely opened eyes, I catch my first glimpse of Dennis, a compact man in his 50s, with the kind of nervous energy that suggests someone accustomed to working in shadows. He's carrying a metal briefcase and what looks like a portable scanner setup. "She's been restless all night," Timothy says quietly, his voice carrying the strain of someone who hasn't slept. "I think she's closer to consciousness than the medical staff realizes." "Doesn't matter," Dennis replies, his voice gravelly from cigarettes, matching the phone conversations I've overheard. "We're past the point of subtlety. The federal auditors are requesting documentation on the Delaware companies by end of business today. We have maybe 6 hours before this whole thing unravels." 6 hours. The timeline has collapsed from their original 12-hour window to something that borders on panic. Good. Desperate people make mistakes, and I'm going to need every advantage I can get. The portable biometric system will bypass the bank's in-person requirements, Dennis continues, unpacking equipment that looks surprisingly sophisticated. Fingerprint scanner, retinal camera, even voice pattern recognition. As long as she's conscious enough to cooperate, we can authorize the transfers remotely. "And if she's not cooperative?" Anya asks, settling into a chair near the window. In daylight, she looks even more professional, the kind of person you'd trust with complex legal matters, which makes her involvement in this conspiracy all the more chilling. Then we explain her situation, Dennis says with the casual tone of someone discussing weather. 7 federal shell companies registered in her name. $4.2 million in government contracts fraudulently obtained. Tax evasion charges that could put her away for 20 years. She'll cooperate. $4.2 million in fraudulent government contracts. The numbers keep growing, and with them, the federal charges that could destroy my life even if I'm completely innocent. They've built a comprehensive criminal enterprise, using my identity, then plan to use the legal consequences of their crimes as leverage against me. The beauty of it, Anya adds, is that we have documentation showing her signature on every shell company registration, every contract application, every financial transfer. Even if she claims fraud, proving her innocence would take years and cost everything she has left. Forged signatures, professional documentation. This isn't amateur hour. It's a sophisticated financial crime operation that's been using my medical crisis as the perfect cover. But they're revealing something crucial. They need me alive and cooperative, at least temporarily, to complete the final transfers. "What about afterward?" Timothy asks, and there's something in his voice that makes my blood chill. "Once we have the trust fund, once everything's transferred, what happens to Carrie?" The silence that follows is deafening. Dennis and Anya exchange glances that speak volumes about discussions Timothy apparently hasn't been part of. "She'll be facing federal charges," Anya says carefully. "The kind that require skilled legal representation, the kind that depletes assets quickly, by the time the legal process runs its course. By the time it runs its course, she'll be financially destroyed and potentially imprisoned for crimes we committed." Timothy finishes, his voice hollow. "That's not what I signed up for." "What you signed up for," Dennis says sharply, "was irrelevant the moment you started forging her signature on financial documents. You're in this as deep as we are now. Timothy has been manipulated just as thoroughly as I have, though his manipulation involved greed rather than trust. They've drawn him into criminal conspiracy gradually, each step seeming reasonable until he's facing federal charges and his wife's destruction. The realization seems to be hitting him now, when it's far too late to back out. The hospital staff. "We'll be changing shifts in 30 minutes, Anya says, checking her watch. That gives us the cleanest window for waking her up and handling the transfers without interruption. Dr. Morrison makes rounds at 8, Timothy says mechanically. We need to be finished before then. Then we start now, Dennis decides, moving his equipment closer to my bed. Simple and direct. Wake her up, explain that urgent financial matters, require her immediate attention, get the biometric authorizations, and transfer everything offshore before anyone asks questions. The casual way they discuss manipulating someone recovering from major surgery, someone they believe is helpless, and dependent on their version of events, reveals the true nature of these people. But it also confirms what I've suspected. They need my conscious cooperation for the biometric systems to work properly. What's our exit strategy? Timothy asks, and I can hear him pacing again. Private jet from regional airport at noon, Anya replies. Non-extradition country, new identities. The whole package costs $2 million, but it's comprehensive. And Carrie? Another telling silence. Carrie will be dealing with federal prosecutors, Dennis says finally. She won't have time to pursue us internationally, even if she had the resources left to try. They're planning to disappear while leaving me to face decades in federal prison for crimes they committed in my name. The elegant cruelty of the plan is breathtaking. Steal everything I have, frame me for additional crimes, then flee the country while I spend my remaining years fighting charges I'll never be able to fully disprove. But they've made critical assumptions about my condition, my awareness, and my capabilities. They think they're about to wake up a confused woman recovering from surgery. They have no idea they've been planning their crimes in front of someone who spent the entire night gathering intelligence and preparing countermeasures. All right, Dennis says, positioning the biometric scanner next to my bed. Let's wake her up gently. Anya, you explain the financial urgency. Timothy, you provide the emotional support. I'll handle the technical aspects. And if she asks too many questions? Timothy's voice wavers. Then we remind her that she's already facing federal charges, Anya says coldly. That cooperation is her only chance of avoiding complete destruction. They move into position around my bed like actors taking the stage for a performance they've rehearsed. Dennis with his equipment, Anya with her briefcase full of forged documents, Timothy with his mask of concern. They think they're about to manipulate a vulnerable victim into authorizing her own financial destruction. Instead, they're about to discover that their perfect victim has been wide awake all night, listening to every word, understanding every detail of their conspiracy, and preparing for exactly this moment. The morning shift change begins in the hallway outside. New voices, different footsteps, the controlled chaos of a hospital transitioning between teams. In a few minutes, they'll wake me up and expect to find a confused woman dependent on their explanations. They're going to find something entirely different. The clock reads 7:45 a.m. when Dennis positions the final piece of equipment, a tablet, connected to what looks like a mobile banking terminal. The sophistication of their setup is impressive and terrifying. This isn't improvised desperation. It's a well-funded operation with professional-grade tools designed specifically for high-stakes financial fraud. 15 minutes until shift change, Anya announces, checking her phone. The morning nurses will be busy with handoffs. Dr. Morrison won't make rounds until 8:30. Perfect window. The biometric scanners are calibrated, Dennis reports, adjusting what looks like a portable fingerprint reader. Even if she's groggy, we can get clean readings. The retinal scanner is more sensitive. She'll need to be conscious enough to focus, but the morphine shouldn't interfere with the basic biometric data. They're discussing me like a piece of equipment they need to operate rather than a human, being recovering from major surgery. The clinical detachment in their voices reveals just how far they've moved beyond ordinary criminal behavior into something genuinely sociopathic. Timeline is critical. Timothy says, though his voice lacks the conviction of his partner's. Once we wake her up, how long before she starts asking coherent questions? Depends on her tolerance, Dennis replies. Some people shake off anesthesia fast. Others stay foggy for hours. But the morphine will keep her compliant. That's the beauty of hospital-based fraud. The medication does half our work for us. Hospital-based fraud. The phrase suggests this isn't their first operation of this type. How many other patients have they manipulated during medical crises? How many vulnerable people have they robbed while those victims trusted them for care and support? What's the backup plan if she becomes suspicious? Anya asks, and there's something in her tone that makes Timothy visibly tense. She won't, Dennis says with disturbing confidence. I've done this before. Medical patients are uniquely vulnerable, disoriented, dependent, grateful for anyone who seems to be handling complex problems for them, especially when those problems involve potential legal consequences. He's done this before. Dennis isn't just a financial specialist. He's a predator who specializes in exploiting people during medical emergencies. The revelation makes my stomach churn, but it also provides crucial intelligence. If he's done this to others, there might be a pattern, evidence, other victims, who could help build a case against him. The key, Dennis continues, is presenting the information as urgent but manageable. Mrs. Henderson, we've discovered some complications with your business accounts that require immediate attention. Nothing we can't handle, but we need your authorization to protect your assets from federal seizure. Most people in her condition will sign anything if you frame it as protection rather than theft. The manipulation technique is sophisticated. Reframe theft as protection, present criminals as helpers, use the victim's medical vulnerability to bypass their normal decision-making processes. But Dennis has made a crucial assumption, that I'll wake up as confused and dependent as his previous victims. What about the federal audit timeline? Timothy asks. If investigators start connecting the dots before we complete the transfers, they won't, Anya interrupts. Federal audits move slowly, especially for complex financial structures. We'll have the money offshore and ourselves out of the country before they realize the scope of what they're looking at. And the shell companies? Will collapse under investigation, leaving behind a paper trail that points directly to Carrie Henderson as the mastermind. Anya explains with chilling matter-of-factness. Her signatures are on every document, her social security number on every registration, her business credentials backing every fraudulent contract. The frame job is comprehensive. Even if I survive this immediate threat, even if I prevent them from stealing the trust fund, I'll still face years of legal battles to prove my innocence in crimes they've committed using my identity. The elegance of their long-term planning is breathtaking in its cruelty. Movement, Dennis says suddenly, watching the monitors connected to my bed. Heart rate's increasing. She might be closer to consciousness than we thought. My heart rate is increasing because I'm fighting every instinct to leap up and attack the people who've systematically destroyed my life while I was unconscious and vulnerable. But I force myself to breathe steadily, to maintain the appearance of someone gradually emerging from medicated sleep. Should we wait? Timothy asks, uncertainty creeping into his voice. No, Anya decides. If she's becoming more alert naturally, that actually works in our favor. More conscious means cleaner biometric readings and less chance of the authorizations being challenged later. Plus, Dennis adds, if she's waking up on her own, it gives us a perfect cover story. The devoted husband noticed his wife stirring and called in financial advisors to handle urgent matters that arose during her medical crisis. Everything completely above board. They move closer to my bed, their presence looming like vultures, circling prey. Through my barely opened eyes, I can see Dennis adjusting the biometric scanner, Anya organizing documents in her briefcase, Timothy arranging his expression into a mask of concerned devotion. Remember, Anya says quietly, we're the solution to her problems, not the cause. The federal investigation is the threat. We're the protection. The shell companies are unfortunate complications we discovered, not fraudulent entities we created. Frame everything as us helping her navigate a crisis, not us manipulating her during vulnerability. The psychological manipulation is as sophisticated as the financial fraud. They've crafted a narrative that positions them as rescuers rather than predators, making their victim grateful for the very people who are destroying her life. All right, Dennis says, checking his equipment one final time. Let's wake her up. Timothy reaches toward my shoulder, his touch gentle and familiar. The same touch that once comforted me through countless sleepless nights of back pain, now prepared to guide me toward financial destruction. Carrie, honey? His voice carries perfect concern, perfect love. If I didn't know what I know, I'd be touched by his devotion. Can you hear me? You're safe, you're in the hospital, and everything's going to be okay. The performance is flawless. The caring husband, helping his wife through a medical crisis. In a few moments, they expect me to open my eyes, confused and grateful, ready to trust their explanations and sign whatever documents they put in front of me. Instead, I'm going to show them what happens when you spend the night planning your crimes in front of someone who's built a career out of staying 3 steps ahead of people trying to take what doesn't belong to them. The game is about to begin, and they have no idea they're already losing. Timothy's hand touches my shoulder with practiced gentleness, the same touch that once meant comfort and safety. Now it's the signal for the most critical performance of my life. I need to appear confused and vulnerable while actually gathering final evidence and positioning myself for counterattack. Carrie, can you hear me, sweetheart? His voice carries perfect concern, perfect love. 20 years of marriage have taught him exactly how to modulate his tone to convey devotion. I let my eyes flutter open slowly, blinking against the morning light streaming through the hospital window. The key is to appear disoriented but not completely unconscious. They need me alert enough for biometric scanning but confused enough to trust their explanations. Timothy? My voice comes out hoarse and weak, which isn't entirely an act. The intubation during surgery and hours of controlled breathing have left my throat raw. What? Where am I? You're in the hospital, honey. You had emergency spinal surgery yesterday. Do you remember? His hand strokes my hair with familiar tenderness, and for a moment I almost forget he's orchestrating my destruction. Surgery. Yes. I let my gaze wander around the room, taking in Dennis and his equipment, Anya with her briefcase, the various monitors and medical devices. To them, I appear to be processing my surroundings with post-surgical confusion. In reality, I'm cataloging evidence and escape routes. Mrs. Henderson, Anya steps forward with professional warmth. I'm Anya Kowalski, a financial advisor. I apologize for bothering you so soon after surgery, but some urgent matters have come up regarding your business. Accounts. Kowalski. Finally, a last name to go with the face. Another piece of intelligence I can use later, assuming I survive this encounter. Financial matters? I let confusion creep into my voice. But I thought, Timothy handles... I trail off, letting them see me struggling to organize my thoughts through the medication haze. That's exactly why we're here, Dennis interjects, his voice carrying false reassurance. Your husband has been trying to protect your assets, but we've discovered some complications that require your direct authorization. I turn my head slowly toward Dennis, studying his face with the careful attention of someone trying to process unfamiliar information. Who are you? Dennis Morrison, certified financial planner. The name is almost certainly fake. Using the same surname as my surgeon is too convenient to be coincidental, but it tells me something about how they operate. They do research. They prepare covers that sound legitimate to confused patients. Complications? I ask, injecting just enough concern into my voice to seem worried but not suspicious. Nothing we can't handle, Anya says smoothly, opening her briefcase. But there are some federal audit notifications that require immediate response, time-sensitive issues that could affect your business accounts if we don't address them quickly. Federal audit notifications. The truth wrapped in lies. There are indeed federal audits coming, but they're investigating crimes these people committed in my name, not legitimate business concerns requiring my cooperation. I don't understand, I say, which is exactly what they want to hear. Federal audits? But my business is clean, we follow all regulations. Of course you do, Timothy says soothingly, taking my hand. That's not the issue. Sometimes government bureaucracy creates problems even for completely legitimate businesses. These people are here to help us navigate the paperwork. The manipulation is textbook perfect. Frame the criminals as helpers, present their demands as protection, use the victim's disorientation to bypass normal skepticism. If I were actually as confused as I'm pretending to be, I'd probably be grateful for their assistance. What kind of paperwork? I ask, letting them see me trying to focus despite obvious mental fog. Dennis positions his tablet where I can see it. Just some electronic signatures to authorize protective transfers. Moving your assets to secure accounts while the audit questions get resolved. Standard procedure. Electronic signatures on a device I can't properly examine, authorizing transfers I can't review, to accounts I know nothing about. But I need to see more of their process, gather more evidence of their methods. My hands. I lift them slightly, letting them see the post-surgical tremor that's partly real and partly performed. I'm not sure I can write clearly. That's why we brought biometric equipment, Dennis explains, gesturing to his scanners. Much more reliable than handwritten signatures, especially when you're recovering from surgery. Just fingerprints and a retinal scan. Completely painless. Biometric equipment that will create permanent, undeniable evidence of my authorization for their theft. But it also means I need to be conscious and cooperative, which gives me a narrow window of opportunity. Before we proceed, I say slowly, as if gathering my thoughts with great effort, could you explain exactly what these audits involve? I want to understand what's happening to my business. Anya and Dennis exchange glances, the first crack in their smooth presentation. They were expecting simple compliance, not questions that require detailed answers they can't give without revealing their crimes. Technical federal compliance issues, Anya says vaguely. Some shell companies were registered using similar business names, creating confusion in the federal database. We need to clarify which accounts belong to your legitimate business operations, Shell. Companies registered using similar business names. They're telling me about their own crimes while framing them as bureaucratic mix-ups. The audacity is breathtaking, but it's also giving me exactly the kind of recorded confession I need. Shell companies? I let alarm creep into my voice. But I never registered any shell companies. My business is Henderson Consulting, incorporated in Delaware 15 years ago. That's the only company I own. The silence that follows is telling. They hadn't expected me to remember basic facts about my own business structure, even while medicated. That's part of the problem, Dennis recovers quickly. Someone has been registering companies with similar names: Henderson Business Consulting, Henderson Advisory Services, Henderson Strategic Planning. The federal auditors can't tell which one is your legitimate business. More lies wrapped around fragments of truth. But now I understand their full strategy. They've created multiple shell companies with variations of my business name, making it appear as if I've been running a complex network of potentially fraudulent entities. That's identity theft, I say, letting worry replace confusion in my voice. Someone's been stealing my business identity? Timothy, why didn't you tell me about this? Timothy's composure finally shows strain. I didn't want to worry you before surgery. You had enough to deal with. But now the federal auditors want to freeze all accounts associated with Henderson-related business names until they can sort out which ones are legitimate, Anya continues. Unless we can demonstrate clear ownership and authorize protective transfers immediately. The time pressure, the threat of asset freezing, the offer of protection through cooperation. It's a sophisticated psychological manipulation designed to bypass rational decision-making through fear and urgency. But they've made a crucial error. By explaining their cover story in detail, they've provided me with a complete understanding of how they've structured their crimes and exactly what evidence federal prosecutors will need to unravel the conspiracy. How long do we have? I ask, as if accepting their narrative. Minutes, Dennis says, checking his watch. The protective transfers need to be completed before the federal systems update at 9 a.m. 9 a.m., less than 30 minutes. They're creating artificial urgency to prevent me from thinking too clearly about what I'm authorizing. Then we should proceed, I say, settling back against my pillows as if resigned to trusting their expertise. They move closer to my bed, their equipment ready, their documents prepared. They think they're about to complete the perfect crime, manipulating a vulnerable woman into authorizing her own financial destruction while creating biometric evidence that will make their theft appear legitimate. Instead, they've just provided me with detailed confessions, complete explanations of their criminal methods, and perfect evidence of their conspiracy to commit federal fraud. The evidence-gathering phase is complete. Now comes the counterattack. As Dennis adjusts his biometric scanner and Anya prepares her forged documents, my mind races backward through 20 years of marriage, reframing every memory through the lens of what I now know. The evidence gathering isn't just about their current conspiracy. It's about understanding how long this betrayal has been building. Before we proceed with the transfers, I say, maintaining my confused but cooperative tone, I need to understand something. Timothy, you said these shell companies have been using similar names to my business. When did this start? Timothy's hesitation is barely perceptible, but after 20 years of reading his tells, I catch it immediately. The federal auditors think it began about 18 months ago, he says carefully. 18 months ago. My mind snaps to a specific memory. Timothy's sudden interest in my business structure, his casual questions about subsidiary companies and tax optimization strategies. At the time, I'd been flattered by his attention to my work, thinking he was finally taking genuine interest in the business that had consumed so much of our life together. That's around when you started asking about my Delaware incorporation, I observe, watching his face carefully. You said you were thinking about updating our estate planning. Exactly, Anya interjects smoothly. That's probably when the identity thieves first started researching your business structure. They would have needed detailed information about your legitimate operations to create convincing fraudulent companies. She's giving me their entire playbook while thinking she's reassuring a confused patient. The identity thieves she's referring to are sitting right here in my hospital room. Timothy provided them with inside information about my business operations, enabling them to create sophisticated shell companies that would appear legitimate to casual inspection. Mrs. Henderson, Dennis says, clearly eager to move past questions and toward the biometric scanning. We really need to complete these transfers before the federal systems update. Could you place your finger on this scanner? But I'm not done recontextualizing the past 18 months. Every memory is taking on new meaning. Every interaction revealing layers of deception I missed while focused on chronic pain and business. Pressures! Timothy, I say, ignoring Dennis's urgency. Remember when you suggested I add you to my business banking accounts? You said it would help if I ever had a medical emergency and couldn't handle financial matters myself. The irony is almost too bitter to bear. He convinced me to give him access to my accounts by using the exact scenario he was planning to exploit, my medical incapacitation. Every safeguard he helped me remove, every authorization he gained, was preparation for this moment. That was good thinking, I continue, maintaining my vulnerable patient persona. Without those authorizations, you wouldn't be able to protect my assets now. Exactly, Timothy says, but there's something strained in his relief. He's beginning to realize that my questions, while appearing grateful and confused, are actually Quite specific and well-informed for someone supposedly disoriented by medication. And the power of attorney documents, I add, as if just remembering. Those were comprehensive. You said your lawyer recommended updating everything after my back problems got worse. Standard estate planning, Anya confirms, though she's watching. Me more carefully now. Making sure spouses can handle emergencies. But my mind is cataloging the timeline differently. The power of attorney documents came first, giving Timothy broad financial authority. Then the business account access, creating pathways for fund transfers. Then his sudden interest in my corporate structure, providing intelligence for shell company creation. Finally, his enthusiastic support for my surgery. Not because he wanted me to feel better, but because he needed me incapacitated when the high conspiracy reached its final phase. The timing really was perfect, I say, looking directly at Timothy. My surgery happening right when these audit problems emerged, almost like fate. The silence that follows is pregnant with tension. Timothy knows me well enough to recognize when I'm processing information at a deeper level than my words suggest. But he's committed to this performance now, can't back down without revealing everything. Sometimes these things just align, unfortunately, he says, but his voice lacks conviction. Or fortunately, Dennis interjects with impatience. If you'd been healthy and alert when the audits began, the federal investigators might have frozen your accounts immediately. Your medical situation actually bought us time to protect your assets. My medical situation. The euphemistic way he refers to major spinal surgery reveals everything about how these people view human suffering, as opportunity, as cover, as tactical advantage in their criminal enterprises. I'm curious about the government contracts, I say, remembering Dennis's earlier phone conversation about federal fraud. These shell companies that were using my business name, they were actually winning contracts? Another tense exchange of glances between the conspirators. They hadn't expected me to ask about specifics that would require them to explain the full scope of their criminal operation. Some consulting contracts, yes, Anya says carefully. That's part of what triggered the federal attention. When multiple companies with similar names start winning competitive bids, auditors look for patterns. Government consulting contracts awarded to shell companies using variations of my business name. The federal liability isn't just about identity theft. It's about fraudulent government contracting, which carries severe criminal penalties and civil damages. Even if I'm cleared of criminal charges, the civil liability could exceed everything I've earned in 20 years of business. How much money are we talking about? I ask, as if trying to understand the scope of the problem. The shell companies generated approximately $4.2 million in fraudulent contract revenue, Dennis says, apparently deciding that honesty serves their manipulation better than evasion. All of which will be traced back to your legitimate business, unless we can demonstrate clear separation through these protective transfers. $4.2 million in government fraud committed in my name. The elegant cruelty of their long-term planning becomes even clearer. They've not only stolen my existing assets, they've created massive federal liability that will destroy me even if they're caught. But if we move quickly, Anya adds, we can demonstrate that your legitimate business assets were maintained separately from the fraudulent operations. The federal investigators will see that you were trying to protect your assets, not hide them. They're reframing their theft as my protection, their crime as my defense strategy. The psychological manipulation is sophisticated enough that even knowing their true intentions, I can feel the appeal of their narrative. For someone actually confused and scared by post-surgical medication, their offer would seem like salvation. I understand, I say, settling back against my pillows as if accepting their explanation. Let's proceed with the transfers. I trust you to protect my interests. The words taste like poison, but they serve my strategy. I need them to proceed with their criminal actions, to create evidence of their fraud while I maintain perfect documentation of their methods. Every biometric scan they take, every transfer they initiate, Every document they use will become evidence in the federal case that's about to destroy them. But as Dennis positions his fingerprint scanner next to my hand, I realize the true scope of my advantage. I haven't just spent the night gathering intelligence about their current conspiracy. I've reconstructed 18 months of systematic preparation, giving me a complete timeline of their criminal enterprise. When federal prosecutors eventually review this case, they won't just see a theft that occurred during medical crisis. They'll see a sophisticated, long-term conspiracy that used a 20-year marriage as cover for identity fraud, government contract fraud, and systematic financial manipulation. The evidence isn't just about what they're doing now, it's about everything they've done since they started planning to destroy me. And I have documentation of all of it. Place your index finger here, Dennis instructs, positioning the biometric scanner inches from my hand. But before I comply, I need to understand the full scope of what I'm fighting against. The evidence I've gathered suggests this conspiracy reaches far beyond 3 people stealing from one vulnerable patient. Dennis, I say, maintaining my concerned but cooperative tone, you mentioned you've handled situations like this before? Federal audits affecting multiple businesses? His pause is barely perceptible, but it tells me everything. I specialize in complex financial protection during federal investigations, he says carefully. Unfortunately, government overreach affects many legitimate businesses. Government overreach. The phrase is a tell. It suggests an ideological framework that justifies financial crime as resistance to federal authority. But more importantly, it confirms this isn't their first operation. How many other businesses have you helped? I ask, as if seeking reassurance about his expertise. Dozens, Anya interjects, clearly wanting to establish credibility. Dennis has been protecting business owners from federal asset seizure for over a decade. This isn't a desperate husband stealing from his wife. It's a sophisticated, criminal enterprise that specializes in exploiting vulnerable business owners during crisis situations. The hospital-based fraud Dennis mentioned earlier is just one component of a much larger operation. And they all involved medical emergencies? I probe gently. Not all, Dennis admits. Sometimes it's legal troubles, sometimes family crises, sometimes natural disasters. Any situation where a business owner becomes temporarily unable to manage complex financial matters. The scope is staggering. They're predators who systematically identify vulnerable business owners, then exploit their crises to steal assets while creating legal frameworks that make the victims appear complicit in their own destruction. What about the shell companies you mentioned? I continue, watching their faces carefully. Are those a common problem, or specific to my situation? Timothy shifts uncomfortably. He's beginning to realize that my questions are more systematic than confused patients typically ask, but he's committed to the performance now. Shell company fraud is unfortunately common, Anya explains. Criminal organizations create legitimate-looking companies using stolen business identities, then use those companies to commit fraud. When the crimes are discovered, the legitimate business owner becomes the primary suspect. She's describing their own criminal methodology while framing it as something that happens to victims. The psychological manipulation is so sophisticated it's almost admirable. They're literally confessing their crimes while making their victim grateful for their help in addressing the problems they created. So the $4.2 million in government contracts, I say slowly, that money was actually stolen from the federal government using my business identity? Exactly, Dennis confirms. The criminals used variations of your business name to submit fraudulent contract proposals. When those contracts were awarded, they collected the money and disappeared, leaving you potentially liable for the fraud. They collected the money and disappeared. Present tense would be collect and disappear. Past tense suggests the money has already been stolen and the criminals have already vanished. Except the criminals are sitting right here in my hospital room, planning to steal even more. Where does stolen money like that usually end up? I ask, maintaining my worried victim persona. Offshore accounts, Timothy says. Places where federal investigators can't easily trace or recover the funds. The same kind of offshore accounts you're planning to use for my protective transfers? The question slips out before I can stop it. Too direct for someone supposedly confused by medication. The silence that follows is dangerous. All three conspirators are staring at me with new attention, their confidence shaken by a question that reveals more awareness than they expected. That's different, Timothy says slowly. Your transfers are legitimate asset protection, not criminal money laundering. But his voice lacks conviction, and I can see doubt creeping into his expression. After 20 years of marriage, he knows my mind, knows how I process information even under stress. He's beginning to suspect I'm more alert than I've been pretending. Of course, I say quickly, forcing confusion back into my voice. I'm sorry, the medication makes it hard to think clearly. I just want to make sure I understand what's happening. Which is completely natural, Anya says, but she's watching me more carefully now. Anyone would be concerned about complex financial matters, especially during recovery from major surgery. The important thing, Dennis adds, clearly eager to move past questions and toward action, is that we complete these transfers before the federal investigation expands. Every minute we delay increases the risk of asset seizure. But I'm not ready to stop gathering intelligence. The extended conspiracy web is larger than I initially realized, and I need to understand the full scope before I spring my trap. These other businesses you've helped, I continue, did they all recover their money eventually? Once the federal investigations concluded? Another telling pause. Recovery depends on many factors, Dennis says evasively. Federal investigations can take years, and legal fees often consume significant resources. Legal fees that consume significant resources. They're not just stealing the money, they're ensuring their victims can't afford to pursue recovery through legitimate channels. The criminal enterprise is designed for total financial destruction, not just theft. But most of your clients were satisfied with your services? I press. Our clients understand that asset protection during federal investigation is about minimizing damage, not eliminating it entirely, Anya says carefully. Minimizing damage, another euphemism for what they actually do. Steal everything they can while making it legally impossible for victims to recover their losses. The psychological manipulation extends beyond the initial theft to ensuring long-term financial destruction. The web around me is complex, but not impenetrable. Every conspirator leaves traces, makes mistakes. Dennis's growing paranoia, Timothy's wavering confidence, Anya's eagerness to rush things. These are all weaknesses I can exploit. Tomorrow they plan to make their move, but they don't realize they're not the only ones who've been planning. Just as my finger hovers over Dennis's biometric scanner, the hospital room door opens with the soft whoosh of pressurized hinges. A woman in professional attire enters, her badge identifying her as Detective Devlin Rodriguez, Financial Crimes Division. The timing couldn't be more perfect, or more dangerous. Excuse me, Detective Rodriguez says, her voice carrying quiet authority. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to speak with Mrs. Henderson about some irregularities we've discovered in her business accounts. The effect on my three conspirators is immediate and electric. Dennis actually jerks his hand back from the biometric scanner as if it's suddenly become radioactive. Anya closes her briefcase with practiced calm, but I can see tension radiating from her shoulders. Timothy's face goes through several expressions in rapid succession: surprise, fear, calculation, before settling on confused concern. Detective? Timothy stands, moving protectively toward my bed. Is there some kind of problem? My wife just had major surgery. She's barely conscious. I understand, sir, and I apologize for the timing, Rodriguez replies, studying the room with professional interest. Her gaze lingers on Dennis's equipment, Anya's briefcase, the various documents scattered around my bed. But we've had some developments that require immediate attention. This is my moment. Everything I've learned, all the intelligence I've gathered, has led to this opportunity. But I need to be careful. One wrong move could expose that I've been conscious all along, potentially endangering Detective Rodriguez and compromising whatever investigation she represents. Detective, I say weakly, maintaining my post-surgical patient voice. What kind of irregularities? Timothy was just explaining that there might be some problems with federal audits. Rodriguez's eyes sharpen with interest. Federal audits? What kind of federal audits, Mr. Henderson? Timothy's carefully constructed composure finally shows cracks. There were some complications with Carrie's business accounts. These financial advisors were helping us address urgent matters before the situation got worse. Financial advisors? Rodriguez looks directly at Dennis and Anya. Could I see some identification, please? The silence that follows is deafening. Dennis and Anya exchange glances that speak volumes about emergency procedures and exit strategies. They're realizing that their perfect crime is about to become a very public arrest. Of course, Anya says smoothly, reaching into her briefcase, but instead of identification, she's positioning herself near the door, clearly calculating escape routes. Actually, I interrupt, my voice gaining strength that surprises everyone in the room. Detective Rodriguez, I think there are some things you need to know about these financial advisors and the federal audits they mentioned. Timothy's head snaps toward me, his eyes wide with sudden understanding. Carrie, how long have you been awake? I finish, sitting up straighter in my hospital bed. Long enough, Timothy. Long enough to hear about the shell companies, the government contract fraud, the offshore accounts, and your plans to disappear to a non-extradition country. The explosion of activity is immediate. Dennis lunges for his equipment while Anya bolts toward the door. But Detective Rodriguez is faster, her hand moving to her weapon as she blocks the exit. Nobody moves, Rodriguez commands. Financial crimes investigation, and you're all under arrest. Wait, Timothy says desperately. There's been a misunderstanding. We were trying to protect Carrie's assets from fraudulent charges. These shell companies, they were created by identity thieves. The shell companies were created by you, I say, my voice clear and strong now. 18 months of systematic preparation, using my business information to create fraudulent entities, forging my signature on government contracts, stealing nearly $7 million while I was dealing with chronic pain. Rodriguez's expression shows professional satisfaction mixed with surprise. Mrs. Henderson, how much of their conversation were you able to hear? All of it, I reply. Every phone call, every planning session, every detail of their conspiracy. To steal my trust fund and frame me for federal crimes they committed in my name. Dennis makes one last desperate attempt. She's delusional from the medication, he says to Rodriguez. Post-surgical patients often hallucinate, create paranoid fantasies. Then you won't mind if we examine that biometric equipment, Rodriguez says, moving toward Dennis's setup. And those documents in Ms. Kowalski's briefcase, and the offshore account information you were about to use for unauthorized transfers. The mention of specific details, Anya's last name, the offshore accounts, the biometric equipment, makes it clear that Detective Rodriguez isn't here by coincidence. This is the result of an ongoing investigation that has been building, parallel to my night of intelligence gathering. How long have you been investigating them? I ask Rodriguez. 6 months, she replies, keeping her weapon trained on the 3 conspirators. We identified a pattern of hospital-based financial fraud, victims who were targeted during medical crises. Your case was flagged when large transfers from your business accounts coincided with your emergency surgery. 6 months. While I was focused on chronic pain and surgery preparation, federal investigators were already tracking the criminal enterprise that was preparing to destroy me. The external validation is overwhelming. I'm not paranoid. I'm not delusional. I'm not imagining. A conspiracy that doesn't exist. The shell companies registered in your name triggered automatic federal alerts, Rodriguez continues. When we discovered the pattern of fraudulent government contracts, we realized you were likely the victim, not the perpetrator. But we needed evidence of the actual theft attempt, she adds, looking directly at me. We needed them to reveal their methods, their co-conspirators, their full criminal operation. The implication hits me like a physical blow. You knew I was conscious. You were using me as bait. Rodriguez's expression shows uncomfortable truth. We suspected you might be more aware than your medical records indicated. Your business background, your analytical skills. We thought you might be gathering your own intelligence. The external validation changes everything. This isn't just about my personal betrayal anymore. It's about ensuring that Dennis's criminal enterprise and all its victims finally receive justice. As Detective Rodriguez begins processing the 3 conspirators, a soft knock at the door announces the arrival of Annie, my night nurse. But she's not alone. Dr. Morrison follows her in, along with 2 additional federal agents and what appears to be a hospital administrator. Mrs. Henderson, Annie says, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and concern. How are you feeling? We've been monitoring your situation very carefully. The emphasis on monitoring makes me realize that Annie's involvement wasn't coincidental either. You've been part of the investigation, I say, understanding flooding through me. Annie contacted us 3 weeks ago, Detective Rodriguez explains, pausing in her evidence collection. She noticed unusual patterns in your husband's behavior during your pre-surgical visits. Late-night phone calls, secretive conversations, questions about your medication schedule that seemed inappropriate. Annie steps closer to my bed, her expression apologetic. I've been a nurse for 15 years, Mrs. Henderson. I've seen family members under stress, and I've seen family members planning something. Your husband's behavior felt wrong from the beginning. 3 weeks ago. Even before my surgery, even before I was physically vulnerable, Annie was already suspicious of Timothy's motives. Her professional instincts were picking up signals I missed because I was focused on trust and love rather than survival. What exactly did you observe? I ask, genuinely curious about what signs I might have missed. Questions about your recovery. Timeline that were too specific, Annie explains. Most spouses ask general questions. When will she wake up? When can she come home? Your husband was asking about exact medication schedules, when you'd be most disoriented, how long various drugs would affect your cognitive abilities. Dr. Morrison steps forward, his expression grim with professional concern. We've been documenting everything since Annie raised her concerns. Your medical records, your husband's interactions with staff, the unusual number of financial advisors who've been asking about your condition. Medical records? I ask, realizing there might be evidence I haven't considered. Your recovery has been remarkable, Dr. Morrison says with a slight smile. Much more aware, much more responsive than someone with your medication levels should be. We've been tracking your vital signs, your brain activity, your response patterns. The data suggests you've been conscious and processing information far longer than appeared clinically possible. They have medical evidence of my awareness. Scientific documentation that I was conscious during the conspiracy, that my intelligence gathering was real and systematic rather than delusional or imagined. How many people knew I was awake? I ask, looking around the room at faces that suddenly seem less like strangers and more like allies. Need-to-know basis, Agent Casper Torres introduces himself, stepping forward with credentials. Federal Task Force investigating financial crimes targeting medical patients. Your case became our primary operation when we realized the scope of the conspiracy. Agent Torres is younger than Detective Rodriguez, with the kind of intense focus that suggests someone who takes white-collar crime personally. We've been building cases against Dennis Murray. That's his real name. And his organization for 2 years. Your situation gave us the perfect opportunity to catch them in the act. Dennis Murray, not Morrison. Another piece of intelligence that confirms how thoroughly they researched their cover identities. But hearing his real name makes me realize something important. If you've been investigating him for 2 years, I say, that means there are other victims, people who didn't have federal agents monitoring their situations. The silence that follows is heavy with implication. Agent Torres exchanges glances with Detective Rodriguez before answering. 14 confirmed victims over the past 5 years, he says quietly. Medical patients, accident victims, people dealing with family crises. Total theft, $43 million. $43 million. 14 victims. The scope of Dennis Murray's criminal enterprise is staggering, but it also means my ordeal has purpose beyond personal justice. What happened to the other victims? I ask, though I suspect I know the answer. Financial ruin, Rodriguez says bluntly. Federal charges for crimes they didn't commit, legal fees that consumed their remaining assets, years of litigation they couldn't afford. 3 of them declared bankruptcy, 1 committed suicide. The weight of that information settles over the room like a shroud. Someone died because of Dennis Murray's criminal enterprise. Someone couldn't survive the systematic destruction of their life, the betrayal of their trust, the financial terrorism that these people inflict on vulnerable victims. But now we have evidence, Agent Torres continues, his voice carrying determination. Your intelligence gathering combined with our surveillance gives us everything we need to dismantle their entire operation and help previous victims recover their losses. The alliance that's formed around my hospital bed represents more than law enforcement and medical professionals. It represents the possibility that systematic criminal enterprises can be systematically destroyed, that victims can become advocates, that betrayal can ultimately serve justice. What do you need from me? I ask, looking around at faces that have transformed from strangers into partners in justice. Everything, Agent Torres says simply. Your testimony can validate the experiences of victims who were dismissed as delusional or confused, help us recover stolen assets, and provide pattern evidence that proves this is organized criminal enterprise. Over the next hour, my hospital room transforms into an impromptu command center for federal evidence collection. Agent Torres has set up a digital recorder, while Detective Rodriguez photographs Dennis's biometric equipment and Anya's forged documents. But the most significant transition is happening within me, the shift from victim to active participant in systematic justice. Mrs. Henderson, Agent Torres says, adjusting the recording equipment. Before we begin your formal statement, I want you to understand what happens next. This investigation will likely take months, possibly years, to fully prosecute. Are you prepared for that level of involvement? The question forces me to confront the reality of what I'm committing to. Months of testimony, legal proceedings, media attention, reliving the betrayal over and over again in courtrooms and depositions. But then I think about the victim who committed suicide, the 3 who declared bankruptcy, the systematic destruction of lives that Dennis Murray has orchestrated. I'm prepared, I say, my voice steady despite the morphine still flowing through my IV. But I want to do more than just testify. I want to help other victims, prevent future cases. Dr. Morrison checks my vital signs while we talk, his medical attention providing a grounding counterpoint to the legal discussions swirling around us. Your recovery is progressing remarkably well, he observes. But you'll need several weeks of physical rehabilitation before you're back to full strength, which gives us time to prepare the case thoroughly, Detective Rodriguez notes. Dennis? Murray's organization is sophisticated, well-funded, with legal resources that will challenge every aspect of our evidence. We need to be prepared for a long fight. Timothy sits in the corner, handcuffed and silent, occasionally looking at me with an expression I can't quite read. 20 years of marriage, reduced to this moment where he watches his life partner actively participating in his prosecution. The betrayal goes both ways now. He betrayed my trust, and I'm betraying the loyalty he might have expected even after his crimes. Timothy, I say, looking directly at him, do you have anything you want to say? Any explanation for why you did this? His silence stretches for nearly a minute before he speaks. I never meant for it to go this far, he says quietly. It started as financial planning, ways to protect our assets. Dennis made it sound so reasonable, so legal. When did it stop being legal? Agent Torres asks, his recorder capturing every word. I don't know, Timothy admits. Maybe it was never legal. Maybe I just told myself it was because I wanted to believe it. The admission is devastating in its honesty. Timothy wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a man who allowed greed to override judgment, who let himself be manipulated by someone far more sophisticated in criminal enterprise. But his weakness doesn't excuse the consequences. My near destruction, the other victims, the systematic fraud committed in my name. The shell companies, I press. You knew those were fraudulent when you signed my name to the registrations. Dennis said they were protective structures, Timothy says, but there's no conviction in his voice. Ways to shield legitimate assets from potential litigation. By forging my signature on government contracts I never saw. Timothy's silence is answer enough. Annie enters with my next dose of pain medication, but pauses when she sees the intensive questioning session. Mrs. Henderson, you've been through major surgery less than 24 hours ago. Are you sure you're up for this level of activity? I'm sure, I reply, though I can feel exhaustion creeping in around the edges of my determination. How much longer do we need for the preliminary statement? Another hour should cover the essential details, Agent Torres says. We can schedule follow-up sessions once you've had more time to recover. But I'm not interested in delaying justice for the sake of my comfort. 14 victims have already waited too long for someone to take Dennis Murray's organization seriously, to treat their systematic destruction as the organized crime it represents. Let's finish this now, I decide. I want Dennis Murray to know that his perfect victim turned out to be his worst nightmare. The controlled transition from victim to prosecutor is almost complete. In the next hour, I'll provide testimony that will help dismantle a criminal enterprise and begin the process of recovering millions in stolen assets. Timothy was right about one thing. This situation has gone much farther than anyone intended. But unlike him, I'm prepared to see it through to the end. The systematic destruction they planned for me is about to be systematically applied to them, and I'm going to ensure that every victim of their criminal enterprise finally receives the justice they deserve. My medical crisis, which they thought made me vulnerable, has instead made me the most dangerous opponent they could have chosen. The controlled transition is complete. I'm no longer their victim. I'm their destroyer, Azara. Agent Torres prepares to record my formal statement. The hospital room door opens one final time. But this arrival is different. It's Gordon Walsh, the federal prosecutor who will be handling the case, accompanied by what appears to be a court stenographer and additional FBI agents. Mrs. Henderson, Prosecutor Walsh says, his presence commanding immediate attention. I apologize for the timing, but we have a unique opportunity here. Dennis Murray's organization has been careful to avoid situations where we could catch them in the act. Your case gives us something we've never had before, real-time documentation of their criminal methods. The weight of his words settles over me. This isn't just about my testimony anymore. It's about creating a legal precedent that will prevent future victims from suffering what I've endured. What do you need from me? I ask, sitting up straighter despite the lingering effects of surgery and medication. Everything, Walsh replies. But more than that, we need you to help us understand their psychological manipulation techniques, their victim selection criteria, their systematic approach to financial destruction. Your business background makes you uniquely qualified to analyze their criminal enterprise. Dennis Murray, still handcuffed near the window, finally speaks. She's a victim of post-surgical delusions, he says desperately. Everything she thinks, she heard was filtered through morphine and anesthesia. Her testimony will be worthless in court. Actually, Dr. Morrison interjects, consulting his tablet, Mrs. Henderson's brain activity patterns during the past 12 hours show remarkable clarity and cognitive function. Her neurological responses indicate she was processing information at enhanced levels throughout the night. Enhanced? I ask, curious about the medical evidence that will support my testimony. Stress and adrenaline can actually enhance memory formation and information processing, Dr. Morrison explains with professional admiration. Your brain was operating in a heightened state of awareness, perfect conditions for detailed recollection and pattern recognition. Prosecutor Walsh nods with satisfaction. Which means your testimony will be medically validated, scientifically documented, and legally unassailable. Dennis Murray's organization chose the wrong victim. The irony is, perfect. They selected me because they thought my medical crisis made me vulnerable and helpless. Instead, it created the ideal conditions for gathering evidence that will destroy their entire criminal enterprise. Let's begin, I say, looking directly at Dennis Murray. I want him to hear every detail of what I observed, every conversation. I recorded in my memory, every moment of his perfect crime falling apart. Agent Torres starts the recording equipment while the stenographer positions herself to capture every word. This is a formal statement given by Carrie Henderson regarding the financial crimes conspiracy she witnessed during her recovery from spinal surgery. But before I begin recounting the night's events, I turn to Timothy one last time. Do you have anything you want to say? Any apology? Any explanation? Any final words before I destroy the life you tried to steal from me? Timothy looks at me with 20 years of shared history in his eyes. Birthdays and anniversaries, business successes and personal struggles, the gradual building of what I thought was a partnership built on love and trust. I'm sorry, he says, quietly. Not sorry I got caught. Sorry I ever thought I could do this to you and get away with it. You were always smarter than I gave you credit for. The admission is both devastating and validating. Even in his apology, he's acknowledging that he underestimated me, that his fundamental misunderstanding of who I am led directly to his downfall. Thank you, I reply. That's exactly what I needed to hear before I begin. I look around the room, at the assembled law enforcement officials, medical professionals, and court personnel. All of them focused on ensuring that Dennis Murray's criminal enterprise is completely dismantled, that previous victims receive justice, that future victims are protected. Agent Torres, I say, my voice clear and strong. Let's begin with the moment I first heard Timothy planning my financial destruction. The perfect timing execution isn't just about my testimony. It's about the precise moment when a criminal organization's greatest strength becomes their fatal weakness. They thought they had planned for everything. They never planned for their victim to be wide awake, analytically gifted, and completely committed to their destruction. As I begin my detailed account of the night's events, I watch Dennis Murray's face carefully. His professional composure is cracking as he realizes that his perfect victim has become his perfect prosecutor. The systematic destruction he specialized in is about to be systematically applied to him. The timing couldn't be more perfect. Their moment of triumph has become their moment of complete downfall. Let the record show, Prosecutor Walsh begins, as I start my formal testimony, that Mrs. Henderson is providing this statement approximately 14 hours after regaining consciousness following major spinal surgery, with medical confirmation of enhanced cognitive function throughout the observation period. As I begin recounting the night's events in detail, Timothy's first phone call about completed transfers, Dennis's arrival with biometric equipment, Anya's discussion of federal audits, I watched the three conspirators' faces carefully. The immediate consequences of my testimony are visible in their expressions. Dennis Murray's professional composure finally cracks completely. "This is impossible," he interrupts. "She was unconscious. The anesthesia levels, the pain medication. There's no way she could have processed detailed conversations with perfect recall. Actually, Dr. Morrison interjects, consulting his medical tablet, Mrs. Henderson's neurological monitoring shows a phenomenon we call hypervigilant consciousness, a state where trauma and stress enhance rather than impair cognitive function. It's rare, but well documented in medical literature. You're all lying, Anya says desperately, her professional legal facade dissolving. This is a setup, a conspiracy to frame innocent people trying to help a confused patient. But her protests ring hollow against the mountain of evidence surrounding us. Dennis's biometric equipment, the forged documents in her briefcase, the recorded phone conversations Agent Torres has been monitoring, the shell company registrations bearing my forged signature. Mrs. Henderson, Prosecutor Walsh says, please continue with your account of the conspiracy to steal your trust fund. As I detail their plan to use portable biometric scanners to bypass bank security, their discussion of offshore accounts, their timeline for fleeing to non-extradition countries, Timothy's expression shifts from fear to resignation. He's finally understanding the full scope of what's about to happen to his life. The federal charges we're looking at, Agent Torres explains to the three conspirators, include conspiracy to commit fraud, identity theft, money laundering, extortion, and racketeering under the RICO Act. Combined sentences could exceed 30 years each. RICO? Timothy asks, his voice barely above a whisper. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, Walsh explains. Your operation meets all the criteria. Organized criminal enterprise, pattern of illegal activity, systematic victim targeting. It's specifically designed for cases like yours. The immediate consequence of RICO charges is devastating. Not only are they facing decades in prison, but the government can seize all assets connected to their criminal enterprise. Houses, cars, bank accounts, even property purchased with legitimate earnings if it can be connected to the conspiracy. What about plea bargains? Anya asks, her legal training finally overcoming her panic. That depends, Walsh replies, on your willingness to cooperate fully with the investigation into Dennis Murray's broader organization. We know about the 14 previous victims. We want information about the network that enabled these crimes. Dennis Murray makes one final attempt at manipulation. Mrs. Henderson, he says, looking directly at me, you have no idea what you're starting. The people who funded this operation, who provided the resources, they don't accept failure gracefully. The threat is subtle, but unmistakable. Even facing decades in federal prison, he's still trying to intimidate and control through fear. But his threat reveals something crucial. There are bigger players in this conspiracy, financial backers who enabled the systematic targeting of vulnerable victims. Are you threatening a federal witness? Agent Torres asks, his hand moving, instinctively toward his weapon. I'm warning her, Dennis replies. This goes deeper than you know. Arresting us won't end anything. But his warning backfires spectacularly. Instead of frightening me, it confirms that my testimony is even more important than I realized. This isn't just about 3 criminals stealing from one victim. It's about dismantling a criminal network that's been systematically destroying lives for years. Prosecutor Walsh, I say, my voice gaining strength. I want full protection for my testimony, and I want to help identify every victim, every criminal, every financial backer involved in this enterprise. The immediate consequences are cascading now. Federal agents are already executing search warrants on Dennis Murray's properties, freezing bank accounts, tracing financial networks. The systematic destruction they planned for me is being systematically applied to them. Mrs. Henderson, Walsh says with professional satisfaction, your testimony is going to destroy more than just the people in this room. It's going to expose an entire criminal industry. As I watch Timothy, Dennis, and Anya being processed for federal detention, I realize the immediate consequences are just the beginning. The real justice, the comprehensive dismantling of their criminal enterprise, and the restoration of their victims' lives is yet to come. They thought they had found the perfect victim. Instead, they found their perfect end. 3 hours after. My formal testimony concludes, the federal investigation has expanded beyond anything I could have imagined. Agent Torres returns to my hospital room with updates that reveal the true scope of Dennis Murray's criminal network. We've executed simultaneous raids on 17 properties across 6 states, he reports, his voice carrying professional satisfaction. Bank records, client files, victim documentation going back 8 years. Your testimony was the key that unlocked everything. The complete unraveling is happening faster than anyone expected. Dennis Murray's organization kept meticulous records: names, addresses, financial profiles, medical conditions, family situations of potential victims. What they thought was professional documentation has become a federal prosecutor's dream: evidence package. How many victims total? I ask, though I'm not sure I want to know the answer. 43 confirmed, with evidence suggesting at least 60 more over the past decade, Agent Torres says grimly. Total theft exceeding $80 million. $80 million. 60-plus victims. The scope is staggering and heartbreaking, but it also means my ordeal has helped expose one of the largest systematic fraud operations in federal law enforcement history. What about the financial backers Dennis mentioned? I ask, remembering his veiled threat about people who don't accept failure gracefully. That's where it gets interesting, Agent Torres says, pulling up files on his tablet. The funding came from a consortium of offshore investment groups, essentially a criminal venture capital firm that bankrolled systematic fraud operations. Your case has given us entry into international money laundering networks we've been trying to penetrate for years. International money laundering, criminal venture capital. This isn't just about Dennis Murray anymore. It's about dismantling global financial crime networks that profit from destroying vulnerable people during their worst moments. My phone rings and Annie helps me answer it. The voice on the other end is unfamiliar but warm. Mrs. Henderson? This is Margaret Chen, one of Dennis Murray's previous victims. Agent Torres gave me your number. I wanted to thank you. Margaret Chen, a woman whose life was systematically destroyed 2 years ago when Dennis Murray's organization targeted her during her husband's cancer treatment. According to Agent Torres's files, she lost her house, her business, and nearly her will to live before discovering the fraud. Mrs. Chen, I say, sitting up straighter despite my physical exhaustion. You don't need to thank me. I'm just sorry. It took so long for someone to stop them. You don't understand, she replies, and I can hear tears in her voice. For 2 years, I've been fighting federal charges for crimes I didn't commit, spending every penny I had left on legal fees, watching. My credit and reputation destroyed. Today, Agent Torres called to tell me all charges are being dropped, and they've frozen Dennis Murray's assets for victim restitution. Victim restitution. The phrase carries enormous significance. It means the federal government isn't just prosecuting the criminals, they're working to recover and return stolen assets to the people whose lives were destroyed. How many other victims are getting similar calls today? I ask Agent Torres. All of them, he replies with satisfaction. Every identified victim is being contacted today. Federal charges dropped, civil lawsuits dismissed, credit reports corrected, asset recovery proceedings initiated. Your testimony has literally given these people their lives back. The complete unraveling isn't just about punishing criminals. It's about systematic restoration of everything they destroyed. The federal government is treating this as what it is: organized financial terrorism that requires comprehensive response. Mrs. Henderson, Margaret Chen continues on the phone, there's something else. We're organizing all the victims. We want to create a foundation to help future victims of financial fraud, to educate people about these schemes, to make sure no one else goes through what we've endured. A foundation, created by victims for victims. The idea resonates deeply. with my own plans for recovery and justice. I'd like to be involved, I tell her. When I'm physically recovered, I want to help however I can. We were hoping you'd say that, she replies. You're not just the victim who stopped them. You're the victim who turned the tables. Your story is going to save lives. After I end the call, Agent Torres shows me additional updates. 3 more. Criminal organizations with similar methods have been identified through Dennis Murray's network. International arrest warrants have been issued. Asset recovery is projected to exceed $60 million. Mrs. Henderson, he says, in 15 years of federal law enforcement, I've never seen a single case create this level of positive impact. You've helped us dismantle an entire criminal industry. The most significant part of the complete unraveling isn't the arrests or asset seizures or international implications. It's the knowledge that 43 people who went to sleep last night facing financial ruin and federal charges woke up this morning free to rebuild their lives. The systematic destruction Dennis Murray specialized in has been systematically destroyed, and it all started with a woman in a hospital bed who refused to stay unconscious while criminals planned her demise. 6 months later, I stand at the podium of the Federal Financial Crimes Prevention Conference, my spine fully healed, and my voice carrying the authority of someone who has survived the unthinkable and transformed it into purpose. The Henderson-Murray case, I tell the audience of law enforcement officials, medical professionals, and financial security experts, changed how we understand and combat systematic fraud targeting vulnerable populations. But more importantly, it proved that victims can become the most powerful weapons against organized crime. The Henderson Foundation for Financial Crime Victims has grown beyond anything Margaret Chen and I originally envisioned. 43 founding members, all survivors of Dennis Murray's organization, creating resources and support systems for future victims while advocating for stronger protective legislation. Timothy received 18 years in federal prison after cooperating fully with the investigation. His testimony helped identify the international funding network and led to additional arrests across 3 countries. During our last conversation before his sentencing, he finally acknowledged the full scope of what he had tried to do to me. I convinced myself I was protecting our future, he said through the prison phone. But I was destroying the person who made our future possible in the first place. Dennis Murray received life without parole under RICO statutes. Anya Kowalski got 15 years and has provided ongoing cooperation that continues to uncover additional criminal networks. The international consortium that funded their operations has been dismantled, with assets exceeding $200 million frozen for victim compensation worldwide. But the personal transformation has been as significant as the legal victories. My consulting business has evolved into a specialized practice, helping individuals and organizations protect themselves from sophisticated fraud schemes. The experience that nearly destroyed me has become the foundation for preventing others from suffering similar betrayals. Recovery isn't just about getting your money back, I tell the conference audience. It's about understanding that surviving systematic betrayal makes you uniquely qualified to prevent it from happening to others. Annie leads our medical fraud prevention program, training healthcare professionals to recognize warning signs. Dr. Morrison heads our medical advisory board, ensuring hospitals nationwide implement protocols to protect vulnerable patients. The trust fund that Timothy tried to steal now funds our foundation's operations. Grandmother Evelyn's money, protected by her paranoia about fortune hunters, has become a fortune that protects others. The most important lesson, I conclude, is that criminal organizations succeed because they assume their victims will remain helpless. Our job is to ensure that assumption is always wrong. As applause fills the conference hall, I think about the woman who lay in that hospital bed 18 months ago, listening to her husband plan her destruction. She thought she was gathering intelligence for survival. She was actually gathering intelligence for a revolution in protecting the vulnerable. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just surviving. It's transforming survival into a mission that ensures no one else endures what you did. Dennis Murray's organization thought they had found the perfect victim. Instead, they found their perfect end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.